JD Vicarja, and welcome to episode 130 of the Rebel Matters podcast. Our guest this week is Rebecca O Keefe, who is an ex-international basketball player and a researcher. She's been involved in the Irish Sport for Palestine group over the last number of years and is active in the Stop the Game campaign, which is calling for a boycott of the Ireland versus Israel international soccer fixture later this year. This is an important conversation that I think you're going to enjoy. And before we get stuck into it, I want to let you know that if you want to support Rebel Matters as an independent media platform, then you can become a patron of the show over at patreon.com/Rebel Matters. I'm going to be posting early access to the upcoming episodes on the Patreon page, and I'll be putting up some exclusive content there as well. You can also like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and find us on Instagram at rebel_matters. That's it from me for now. I hope you enjoy this conversation and let us know what you think in the comments below. So I wanted to speak about the Stop the Game campaign, but I was thinking a good place to start might be to talk a little bit about Sport for Palestine, how that came about, and what kind of campaigns have been going over the course of the last number of years, and like really what kind of response that we've seen to those campaigns. So how did Sport for Palestine come to be in the first place?
Yeah, so back in, I suppose, 2023, the end of the year after the outbreak of the genocide, a number of sports people were coming together, thinking that they needed to use their platform to speak out. And it kind of coincided with the same time that I had called for the basketball boycott in November 2023. So we all kind of joined forces and had an open letter which was calling on sanctions against Israel and international sport, asking for demanding their removal from sport and competition, and then also calling for political sanctions, calling the government, the Irish government, to act. So that was signed by over 350 sports people across a range of different sports, past and present, and then we delivered that to the Dáil, and since then it's only grown. We've got way more sporting people joining, way more sports. We've got international networks now. So yeah, we've got a range of different campaigns. We support fundraising on the ground in Palestine. We've made connections with various organisations there. Just to highlight the restriction of movement, the ongoing apartheid, the ongoing occupation, and kind of how sport can act as, I guess, a canvas for highlighting the ongoing brutality and the restriction of movement, but then the ongoing targeting of athletes and sporting life, destruction of infrastructure. So we kind of highlight that, we show solidarity with Palestine, and then obviously demand the sanctioning of Israel and continue to call for their boycott.
So you came from a basketball background yourself,
yeah.
So kind of makes sense that whenever the Israeli basketball team was drawn against Ireland to play, was that would be kind of like a focal point for you? Is that what kind of got you involved in Sport for Palestine in the first place?
Yeah, exactly. I the former international player, wasn't on the team this time around, but when I saw that they were slated to play against each other, I called for the boycott. And then, it coincided with people forming to kind of use sports as a platform to speak out. So then I suppose like January 2024, it all kind of came together, we joined forces.
So just to take that one kind of case as a kind of an example, like, but what's the kind of rationale or the argument for not playing against the Israeli national teams in whatever sport, but specifically in basketball here? Like, what's the argument against it?
Yeah, so I suppose the genocide in itself, you should be sanctioning states that are committing egregious international law violations. There was a precedent where they removed Russia and Belarus in 2022, and actually federations refused to play, and then the organising body said, okay, we're removing Russia and Belarus. So federations themselves set this precedent that they weren't going to play. There's also statute breaches of sporting charters. So it's like basketball and football are actually quite similar in their sporting charters insofar as there's territory integrity. So Israel is playing on stolen land from Palestinians, and they're operating illegal settlement clubs which go against not only international law but also sporting charters. So like for decades they should have been removed based on their own rules and regulations. So those statute breaches, the legal contraventions of international law, also the moral point as well, that when you play against these regimes, you're normalising and legitimising their presence. You're giving cover to war crimes and apartheid. There's also, other precedents of sporting boycotts, such as apartheid South Africa, where sporting boycotts were like instrumental in dismantling apartheid because it can have impacts far beyond sport. And so these regimes need to be isolated across sporting life, cultural life, economic, everything. So when they were slated to play, I just thought the obvious move was to be call for the boycott. Like, you can't. You have to take a stand and refuse to play, and then that can be the catalyst for more action and more organising governing bodies to also refuse to play.
So there is like a sporting precedent for it. There's a basis in international law for it, and as you mentioned, there is also a moral basis to not playing against international teams who are like engaged in doing genocide against other people. So when you guys decided to kind of start this campaign to pressure and put pressure on the governing bodies to try and boycott this game, what was the process like for getting that kind of petition together and putting the pressure on them, and like what kind of response did you get to it?
Yeah, so I firstly called for the governing body to act, that's FIBA, which is the equivalent of FIFA, calling on them to act to remove, like they had done previously with other nations and offending nations.
So FIBA have actually themselves boycotted other matches in the past?
They've removed Russia and Belarus. And then actually, I think maybe a year or two ago, they actually removed the British Federation for infringements on statutes. So they've since then have removed other nations, but they refused to act against Israel. So calling on the governing bodies. So it's kind of like, I guess, a tiered system of calling on the governing bodies to act, firstly, within their own jurisdiction, and then calling on the national governing bodies, so like Basketball Ireland, the FAI, the football body, calling on them to also stand up, because the federations have acted before previously. So they have refused to play various matches. Basketball has refused to play Russia and Belarus and other federations, which sparked then the governing body to act. And then also in football, you had Sweden, Poland and Czechia who refused to play Russia, and then that sparked the the governing body removing Israel. And none of these federations were penalised, which is also important to say, because they'll often hide behind risks or sanctions or destroying the sport in the country, which is not true. Going the governing body, the national bodies, and then unfortunately then in the basketball case it fell on players, because also the government has a duty to step in and protect these organisations too. So failing action from the governing bodies and the government, the pressure went to players, and we have always said the players shouldn't have been in that position. We've always said organisations should be acting on behalf of players who they represent and should be protecting, because there was a whole lot of escalation leading up to that basketball game. So before the game, it received international attention because the Israeli team had machine guns on the court during training sessions. They had active duty soldiers meeting players. They had political messaging. They had so many different things that contravene the rules of sport.
Where was this match scheduled to take place again? Was it in Ireland?
There was, the home game was in Ireland. Then the away, I think they'd moved games from Israel, but then they both were moved to Latvia. So the escalations happened, and 5 individual players boycotted, which should have been the headlines, but actually, as it turned out, the team said that the Basketball Ireland said they're playing the fixtures, and the team fulfilled the fixture. But because one of the Israeli players falsely accused Ireland of being anti-Semitic, Ireland then said, okay, we're not shaking hands, we're not doing pre-match rituals. So the headlines were Ireland refused to shake hands and refused to chat, which, it did spark a conversation, and it kind of was probably one of the first instances of conversations around sport and Israel, and I think that was massively helpful. But I guess for the boycott call and crossing the picket line, and for kind of what we wanted the end outcome to be, they still fulfilled the fixture. Because we think if you're playing, you're normalising playing against them. You should be refusing it on all fronts.
Was there strong support amongst the players initially to have the match boycotted in the initial stages, before it got to the stage where it was clear that the players were going to have to kind of carry the burden, or they felt like a duty to play the game because of the pressure they were under? But at the early stages, what was the support like?
I would say they all wanted the organisations to act. They wanted the government to step in and protect them. They wanted it out of their hands. So that was definitely the sentiment. And then as it went on, I don't think Basketball Ireland handled it particularly well, and I don't think they protected the players particularly well because they were kind of left exposed. There was a lot of online abuse directed at them, which we totally disagree with.
From within Ireland? From
within Ireland, from internationally, from every angle. So I don't think that was not good on any level. So the players felt a lot of scrutiny then, they felt a lot of pressure, and it just kind of, I mean, I don't want to speak for any player here because I wasn't on the team, but I can only imagine how they felt, especially the match was played behind closed doors, is a so-called neutral venue. So yeah, I can only imagine the kind of atmosphere was there, and especially the intimidation from Israel, the danger of this escalation that was happening. So I know from the players who boycotted, they wanted to protect their anonymity because of all the scrutiny that was going on, whereas they should have been celebrated for boycotting.
So when this campaign landed on the table at FIBA, what was the response? How did it go from there looking at this campaign that's been started to boycott this game to them saying we're not going to boycott it, we're going to play it? What's the process there?
Silence, absolute silence. I got zero reply from anything, and then from FIBA, absolute silence. From Basketball Ireland, silence again. They just buried their heads in the sand and did not. They wanted the problem to go away, but we weren't letting that happen. And they released some statements that were incredibly vague. They were not good statements. I don't think it was handled well. I think though, so there was 2 fixtures in this Eurobasket window, and then Ireland got drawn to play against them again in the next Eurobasket window, so they had 2 more fixtures. And then I think they were still intent on playing it. They said, again, hiding behind sanctions and the risk to the sport, because they said we'd be fined, we'd be banned from other competitions, which if you actually look at the statutes, it's always very vague and it's always hypothetical, and it's never, the fine would have been an upwards limit, and it also would have been if you're boycotted both fixtures. So a lot could have happened that it wouldn't have gone to that, and you can also appeal through, the Court of Arbitration of Sport. So they hid behind those, they doubled down and they just said, we are sticking to this, we are essentially protecting basketball. And I have to say, basketball is very underfunded in Ireland, and I would never want to see the downfall of any sport, but I also want to demand the organisations act in the best interest of their players and in the ethos of sport. So yeah, they definitely buried their heads in sand, played 2 more times against Israel, and again wanted no attention brought to this, and then they also played them in 3v3 competition. So the same players boycotted. They then brought more players on to play the games. They didn't want any attention or media. They released statements to try to get out ahead of it. But yeah, the growing movement, the public sentiment had already grown that nobody wanted to play this game. So. And
then, what was I going to ask you there was, looking back now, do you feel like the decision was made to go ahead with the game in the interest of protecting basketball, or do you think that there might have been other forces at play here that kind of compelled them to keep quiet and go ahead with the games?
It's hard to say, and again, I don't want to speak for them, but I can only, from my position, say I don't think the sanctions were overstated. I don't think that would have been meted out to Basketball Ireland. There was precedent to rely on. I think they were acting from external pressure and possibly political interference, because we've seen that from many different instances. So maybe they told themselves they're protecting the sport, but I also think there's something to be said about reputation, integrity, fulfilling these universal values of sport that we're taught, and acting in accordance with these moral and ethical values. So I think I know what decision I would have made. So no, I don't think it helped the sport's reputation. But what it did help, I suppose, was spark the conversation around sporting boycotts in Ireland. It's helped bring that into public discourse as well, because a lot of people still tend to rely on sports and politics shouldn't mix. So it did bring that conversation forward, and I think as well the groundswell of, pro-Palestinian support from Irish civil society grew and has grown, and I think we can compare now to how the Stop the Game or like the football boycott is going. And it's a world of difference in terms of the growth and the, you know, how people have joined this campaign now. And I get football is a very different beast to basketball. Football's hugely popular, so I'm not comparing them that way, but I am comparing, you know, the support has grown so much. And I guess at the end of the day, like, our messaging hasn't changed. We still are saying the exact same things, that you shouldn't be playing against an apartheid state, you shouldn't be normalising giving cover to genocide, you should be, you know, sanctioning the offending regime. So we haven't changed that messaging, but the support has grown.
And like, we're talking January 2024 here, right?
Yeah,
when
well,
this much...
November 2023.
Okay, so it's just after the beginning of the genocide, really. And the things definitely have progressed there. When you look at the trajectory that like, a lot of people have travelled, not only in the sporting world, but like in the musical world as well. I remember back in those early days where people who had a certain level of kind of support for the Palestinian cause in general, who were artists or sports people, at that point still would have been quite hesitant to kind of make their views public for fear of like being penalised for it, like losing gigs or losing points in matches and stuff like that there. But when I think about what we're seeing now, more and more people are willing to take those steps, and I think it is because certain people went ahead and did it anyway in the early days and proved that it's not the end of the world, and also proved that it is like morally the right thing to do. So I wanted to ask you then about how the pressure ends up back on the players if the governing body keeps quiet. Is it a case of putting pressure on the players to fulfil the fixture, because if the fixture isn't fulfilled, that a team's going to be relegated or points are going to be lost, or there's going to be like financial penalties?
Yeah, if the governing bodies don't act and don't take, you know, moral authority and decisive leadership, it goes to fall on the players then. And as a player, you never want that. I mean, you've worked your whole career to like represent your country. You're possibly getting a cap for the first time. You want to play the game, but when it's left to you to decide as an individual, yes, everyone has a moral duty. Everyone has, you know, a conscience that they will then have to live with. So everyone can act and should act, but it shouldn't be up to individuals on a team setting or when governing bodies have previously demonstrated that they've acted in similar ways before. They should still be acting. So when it comes to players, we just say like the last resort should be putting pressure on players. Like, it should still be up to the governing bodies. They should still be acting. And when they don't act and it comes to the game time, the scrutiny does go on the players, and that's not what they have, you know, signed up for. And there was a lot of abuse in the start. There still is a lot of abuse going on, and nobody should be subjected to that. But then, like, you just have to support them, because people have gone before. You can still act. You can still, you know, act morally. Stand up for what you believe in. But you then have to remember and put it in perspective that some things are bigger than sport, but also, you know, if you are to be fulfilling these universal values and acting in a sporting way, sometimes the right decision is not to play the game or not to fulfill that fixture, because if you think about how Palestinians are subjected to targeting, maiming, killing, injuring, restriction of movement, you know, there is no level playing field for Palestinians. And I think when you put that perspective into it, you then very quickly realise, yeah, it's more than sport, it's more than a game. And, you know, there was someone said, you know, when you think about 6 points or, you know, how many thousand lives, and when you put it like that, it's quite stark. And possibly, you know, demonstrating your sporting values and your leadership would be not to fulfil these fixtures. But yeah, it shouldn't ever be on players.
What kind of abuse have players been receiving that you know of?
So there was a lot of online abuse, a lot of targeting, especially if team names get listed, just a lot of that. I personally got a lot of abuse, I still get a lot of abuse, and especially when the players were anonymously boycotting. I guess I was a public figure, the spokesperson that was, you know, public, so then I got a lot of that abuse. But again, like, that's nothing compared to what Palestinians are going through. Like, it's all relative. But I suppose now, if people are taking a stand against them or acting to not fulfill fixtures or not play, or like showing solidarity to Palestine, there's so much support. So that has shifted a lot as well. Like, that landscape is totally different now, that there is support for people acting in solidarity with Palestine.
Yeah, so I suppose that the support outweighs the
Yeah.
abuse, but that doesn't take away from the fact that abuse is abuse, and
Yeah.
it can be difficult to deal with at times. Like, is it people like sending messages? Like, what's the tone of the messages? Like, what are the for example, people sending a message if you're kind of campaigning to not play against a team that's involved in genocide?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of threats. There's a lot of like derogatory comments. There's a lot of, it's very angry. And I will say that there is a difference between the messages or abuse level at men versus women, because then it becomes like sexually violent very quickly against women. Yeah, and it I know people say, oh, don't read the comments, or it's only online, but it doesn't live online. Like, it does translate. Like, I've gotten abuse in person as well, and I'm sure other people have. And it's very threatening, it's very violent, and yeah, you just don't feel safe. And I mean, I know people who have maybe possibly lost jobs or like been threatened with like losing jobs for speaking out. So there is definitely a risk with that, but I think it's, again, has shifted. A lot of people should be speaking out. There's no reason not to speak out as well. I know safety is a thing, but you should be speaking out, and a lot more people are speaking in support. There is a whole community to support you there, and yeah, it's nothing compared to Palestinians, but the safety is it's a real thing, and it doesn't live online. But then as well, like, if you think about it, it wasn't just online abuse. Like, the players who were playing, they were in this very threatening, violent atmosphere where, you know, machine guns in the realm of sport, and this is what Israel does. If you're in a society that normalises such violence, and so, you know, genocidal violence every single day, you have mandatory military conscription, players have possibly served in these armies, they've committed war crimes. When violence is your everyday reality, that spills into sport. Sport's not immune to that whatsoever, and it actually, sport can reproduce these oppressive structures. So the violence is in the realm of sport. You see it from the Israeli fans, you see it from, you know, different fixtures. It's incredibly violent, tense atmosphere, and that's normalised. And that's also the current reality of sport that we're accepting, and what organising bodies are accepting. So they use the sporting arena to weaponise their propaganda, their Zionism, and to push a particular narrative of Israeli Zionism, which is backed up by the US and then backed up by all these states who also support it and don't take action.
It seems to be that one of the counter arguments that gets made to these campaigns that are campaigning for boycotting playing against Israel in various sports is that sports and politics shouldn't mix. And a part of me also thinks that for some people, they might believe that to be true because maybe they're not as tuned into what's happening in Palestine. Like, for people who are like keeping up to date with what's happening on the ground in Gaza and in the West Bank, people who watch the news on a regular basis or even try and keep up to date with things on social media, like, you tend to get, it's like omnipresent for a lot of people, and you do tend to get like an understanding of what's happening on the ground. But that's not to say that everybody is like that. So sometimes I think maybe people think that is the case, that sports and politics should stay separate. But how do you counter that point then?
Yeah, well, I think people want to believe that. I think it's absolutely false, because politics or sports doesn't exist in a vacuum. Like, there's no such thing as political neutrality in sport. There's no such thing as political neutrality in anything. And yes, they might not be attuned to kind of world affairs or current events, but that's not to say politics doesn't exist in sport. Because as I said, like discriminatory structures and oppressive structures exist in sport. It's a mirror of the society around them. They exist in the context of the society. So when people say sports and politics shouldn't mix, they're saying sports in a particular type of politics, because politics is very definitely in sports, and they're saying it's just giving cover for inaction. It's a reason to hide behind excuses and double standards and blatant hypocrisy. Because if you think about it, I mean, every decision in sports is related to politics. Even if you're playing, socially, or you're playing on a amateur league or whatever you're playing, it's all gotten to that point by political decisions. So I've always played sports. I love sports. I've grown up playing sports. But it's also the first place that I've experienced discrimination. I've experienced inequality, unfairness. And I mean, that's down to the rules that you're playing. It's down to the kit you're wearing. are you wearing men's kits? I used to play on boys teams as well, like, and it's just not set up until you demand it or until you like advocate for it, which you shouldn't have to do. But until you advocate for change, it's not going to get any better. And you've seen, you know, unequal wages. You see on like the world stage, like professional athletes not getting the same wages for the same job. And you know, if you're saying sports, it's just it's a way to not act. And if you even think about, okay, you're a fan, you're not even playing, and you're going, how much are you paying for the tickets? Who's owning the club? Like, you're already engaging kind of, you know, Marxist principles there, because, you know, if the greedy owners and like trickling down, you know, you're already engaging political conversations, but you don't even maybe realise they are political. And I actually think sports is such a good site for activism and for organising, for mobilising, because it already has all the ingredients there. It has communities, it has people ready and waiting to get mobilised. It has the ability to cross divides and also reach spaces and be accessible to people where, you know, traditional political spaces can't reach. It also makes world problems and inequality really understandable and relatable to people, because if you can compare it to a sports analogy or you can compare it to any other kind of analogy, that's how people can understand it, and then you can apply it to society. So I do think, sports is a really great place for activism, and we've seen that, and we've seen how, you know, the impact of sports activism and athlete activism can have if people have this platform and they're using it. I mean, it's amazing to see people react to it so positively, and then how it can go beyond sport and can really influence a lot of different decisions. And then even like when politicians say sports and politics shouldn't mix, and the government says we don't want to get involved because it's not our decision to make, that's absolute nonsense, because then they're the very first people to celebrate when the country does well on the world stage. They use sports as soft power, they use it for nationalist agendas. I mean, you're like the flag, the anthem, like all this kind of stuff, like it's so political actually. And yeah, it's just a reason to not act.
And you're making some really strong points, Sarah, and I don't think that they detract from the fact that we also use sport as a way to get away from our troubles in life and
100%.
get some time for ourselves, be in good company, and kind of just be active and be healthy. You can have the two things
100%.
hand in hand, and specifically with regards to the political aspect of the Israeli teams. You've mentioned a few of the things already, like having active, serving members of the Israeli occupation forces playing for the teams, having past members playing for the teams, having on-duty armed forces at training sessions, and the fact that the sporting arena is used for the normalisation of the Israeli regime, are all things that like we just can't get away from, really, and that makes sport in that sense inherently political. There's no way to get away from it at all.
Yeah, no, don't get me wrong, like sports can all like 100% be used for bringing people together. It has these shared values that connect everyone. It is at its core like really powerful in that respect, and it is such a facet of daily life in terms of movement, in terms of community, in terms of, you know, even just like play and joy and that kind of thing. And we do see that as well to be used for resistance purposes, but even just at its root core, like sport can, you know, unite. But then you also see leaders using that very cynically to rely on this narrative that sports can unite, and sport should be used just for that, and these universal values of sportsmanship and fairness and equality. But they use that without ever actually acting on it properly. And yeah, no doubt sports will be used for, you know, future rehabilitation efforts, and we already see that, and like you see it as well, like being involved in the gyms and stuff. But if you're not standing up and acting when it really counts, and like, I mean, how many times have FIFA and UEFA been silent when athletes have been murdered or injured, or stadium like converted into mass detention centres? But yet then they'll come around and say, well, we're putting X amount of $1 million into reconstruction efforts in Gaza. And you're like, you're just like, it's just a colonial package of using sport very cynically. And it rings hollow when they say that. But at the grassroots level, at like, you know, the people power level, of course, sports can be used for incredible things.
It's the people who participate in sports on a grassroots level, and the fans who go and see the games, and even professional players or national or international level players, for the most part, haven't asked for sport to be politicised. It probably would be easier if it wasn't politicised, but it's more, I think, when I look at it, a case of getting up to speed with reality. It is political, not by our own doing for the most part, but by the fact that it's been used to normalise genocide and so on. So
yeah, and athletes shouldn't have to be activists. Like they shouldn't. That's not what they're supposed to be doing. Supposed to be playing. But at the same time, there's massive power when they do speak out, and there's massive power when they collectively organise. I mean, I think some of the greatest examples have been women in sport. Looking at the WNBA, when they have been so outspoken on a load of social justice issues. They have essentially tried to unionise to kind of get greater pay, and even the women's soccer. So many great examples of activism have come from sport. I guess I would put it down to a lot of the ingredients I mentioned earlier. But yeah, no, athletes shouldn't have to be activists. You shouldn't have to be demanding better standards and equality from the organising bodies. But I do put it back to those, as you said, those organising bodies not acting in our interests. And if you're not acting in times of genocide, you can't guarantee that they're going to act in any other time for your own interests, and unfortunately then you have to demand it from them.
And we are in the lead up to probably what is the most high profile and significant in terms of numbers and exposure fixtures, that there's a very strong campaign to boycott it in the Stop the Game campaign, but that's not the only other example that we have of Ireland and Israel being drawn against each other and campaigns being put forward to try and boycott the fixtures. Like we recently had the Irish wheelchair rugby team who were drawn against them, and I guess it's a replica of the process that you just described in terms of it being brought to attention that there was an issue here with this fixture, and seemingly the governing body not following through with boycotting the fixture and putting the onus back on the players to take a personal stance on it, which ultimately kind of resulted in the game going ahead anyway, and fair play to those people who are involved in wheelchair rugby who did take a stance. But then I think something you mentioned earlier, which I meant to ask you about, this thing about not shaking hands with the players beforehand or not standing for the national anthem. While it is kind of a gesture on the surface, it doesn't really cut it in terms of a significant protest or a significant kind of gesture of solidarity towards Palestine or against the genocidal state. It's just because the game's going ahead ultimately, and I think that maybe there's a bit of a bridge a gap to be bridged there in terms of how ineffective those things are as well. Yeah,
not shaking hands or not standing for the anthem or those kind of things. Yeah, as you said, it's not enough, and it kind of makes any effort then seem ineffective. But as you we still are building on things, so no matter what step you take, no matter what action you take, you're still building. And yeah, so playing, or you're not shaking hands but you're still playing against them, or people often say yeah, but why don't we play them so we can beat them? I mean, you're never guaranteed to beat them, but also any time you're playing against them, you're normalising playing against them. The problem is Israel's presence in sport and competition, and that's not what we should be giving cover for. We should be rejecting it.
It's easy to stand up on your high horse and be like, we shouldn't be playing any games, but I also want to make it very clear that we're both coming from a place of two people who have participated in sport our entire lives, who love still participating in sport, and coming from a place of trying to understand the players who still feel like they should go ahead with the game, or who feel a lot of pressure to go ahead with the game because of pressure being put on them by the governing bodies. And at the end of the day, we're all kind of at different stages of our awareness of what's happening in Palestine, and understanding the impact of our actions as sporting people or as musicians or whatever the case may be, in any field really. Mm-hmm. These relatively small gestures for us can have a significant impact in terms of the impact that they have in terms of how other people maybe understand what's happening in Palestine. We do all have a baseline responsibility to become aware of what's happening here.
And you can't say you didn't know, I mean, at this point.
Yeah, but at the same time, it is also important to kind of meet people where they're at and help bring them along a couple of steps along the road, which hopefully that this podcast is going to help with that process. In terms of the Stop the Game campaign, Ireland and Israel playing against each other in an international soccer fixture. It's due to take place in October.
September and
October. It's 2 games, one scheduled for home, one scheduled for away. And what I guess probably a lot of people know about this campaign so far, or this fixture so far, is that the home game has now been rescheduled to be in a neutral venue. Is it going to be in Hungary or somewhere like that?
So one of them has been scheduled to Serbia and the other is Hungary. But they're not in the capital cities, they're like purposely put away in small little towns. Yeah, so these so-called neutral venues are not neutral. But yeah, I suppose to explain Stop the Game campaign, it is a collective of various different groups and individuals across sporting communities. It's football-led, which is very important because it's coming from the sporting community itself. It also includes various pro-Palestinian civil society groups, which also shows the depth and strength of the Irish civil society movement. And then previous players, managers, even pundits have all been speaking out in favour of it. We've also had strong support from the political left, trade unions. So many different aspects of Irish life are involved and supportive of this, and it's yet Stop the Game. So even though the matches have been moved, we're very definitely still saying it's Stop the Game, not move the game. And we've done, I think, given the short span we've had, I think it's done a lot in terms of, raising awareness. So again, telling people, not even just a moral argument, there is very strong legal basis for these matches not to go ahead. And if we're talking about, people trying to make moral decisions or trying to take action, we can very easily assuage that by saying, okay, well, there's a legal argument here that they are breaking international law, so they shouldn't be hosting these games or playing these games. They're also breaking sporting statutes. So what we mentioned earlier about illegal settlement clubs. And so this has been going on for decades, as you've said. So even before the genocide, which they should be removed for, like decades ago, they should have been removed for the illegal settlement clubs, which have grown in size and stature. There's now 10 illegal settlement clubs operating on land stolen from Palestinians. So that alone should be reason to remove them. They haven't been. Palestine Football Association has been making the case for the last 15 years to get this removed. FIFA had its own internal monitoring committee which said these illegal settlement clubs should be sanctioned. FIFA ignored that. You've had international human rights groups saying Israel's committing apartheid, and these clubs are also complicit in that. They should be dismantled. You have 2016 UN resolution, you have the 2024 ICJ decision. So much evidence is saying that these clubs should be removed, they should be dismantled, Israel's committing apartheid. And that's the basis of why we don't think this game should go ahead. It's also the basis of, there was a motion put to the Football Association of Ireland last year, completely member-led process. So again, these channels of action are open for members to take action, and 91 or 93% of members voted for FAI to bring this motion to UEFA of removing Israel. So the members don't want this game. We've had polling across Irish population. I think one of the media outlets said 74% don't want the game to go ahead. The Players Football Association of Ireland have also said, I think it's 63%. So all clear majorities do not want the game to go ahead. So you're getting players, fans, sports, politicians, the general population. We've also conducted our own polling. So this was, robust, very representative of the population. We conducted it in March and then repeated the exact same polling, and it showed a sizable shift to a clear majority wants to boycott these matches. So yeah, we're getting strong support from everyone to boycott these matches. So even if, the team wants to take action, there's strong support there. But again, it should be up to the FAI, it should be up to the government to step in. There was also legal, we took a legal case against the government that you should be cancelling these fixtures. And then the trade unions, now that they've moved the fixtures, the trade unions have said we will still support workers who do not want to facilitate these games going ahead. So every factor and facet of life is supporting the boycott call. So yeah, and then we had direct action in the game against Ireland versus Qatar, and that was, hugely effective as well. And I think a lot of people are feeling more empowered to speak out against the matches going ahead. And yeah, also the FAI misrepresenting the Palestine Football Association in their statement to say they endorsed and supported the games going ahead, but actually they didn't, and the PFA had to then come out and say, we did not, you've misrepresented us. And I think that was, again, just a really shameful, really, really shameful example of the FAI just acting without any kind of moral conscience.
So why is there such a reluctance to act and to boycott the game?
I think political interference has a massive role to play in this. The government, interestingly, previously have always been like, we're washing our hands of acting here, but when the games were announced, they immediately came out in support of it and support the FAI, and that was bizarre because it just doesn't track with other action they've taken. So I do think, the US influence is a lot to discuss here as well. And yeah, political interference, the governing bodies themselves enacting pressure on FAI and the federations, because they know how big and impactful a sporting boycott can be. They know exactly, so that's why they're doubling down on playing it. They're also, threatening risks to the sport and with sanctions, which again, we can counter that and say, you're being very vague and hypothetical here. You've only ever said it's 6 points, which if you play, you stand to lose anyway, because if you don't win. And then there's never been, a definite figure if there was a financial sanction. Also, could the government support that if there was? But again, you can take these sanctions, if they are to be enacted or imposed, you can take them to the Court of Arbitration for Sport, which is the appeals process. You can firstly appeal them within UEFA, but then you can appeal them within CAS, and a high likelihood of being overturned given previous precedents. So yeah, I do think they hide behind sanctions, and they just want to. It's political interference. Like, if rules were applied equally, Israel would have been removed a long time ago, but political decisions are keeping them in sport.
So ultimately, what needs to happen to stop the game?
I think federations need to act and show authority.
So the federations are like FAI, UEFA, FIFA. I think they all need to be acting, with courage and moral authority and leadership. The government can also act here and step in, because there's so many precedents of previous action, but the government stepped in when Ireland was due to play the former Yugoslavia. Federation stepped in against Russia, Belarus. FIFA, UEFA stepped in then as well. They also stepped in for South Africa. There's any amount of sporting boycotts, and the federations and governing bodies' participation within these to say you should be acting. So like UEFA and FIFA, like they're international governing bodies,
yeah.
And then the FAI is
Irish.
Is it for the whole Ireland, or is it just for the south?
I think it's just the south, yeah. But FIFA, so UEFA is the European body, and Israel is participating in Europe. So it's also kind of relevant to say that they were participating in Asia. That's where Palestine has their jurisdiction. But the Arab boycott of the 50s, I think it was, were boycotting Israel on all fronts, and that included sport. And so the Asia Cup, the Asian Federation Cup, refused to play against Israel, and that's why they do not participate in Asia anymore. They then went to Europe. So actually Europe giving Israel cover there and shielding them from any kind of accountability kind of just again goes to show how hypocritical they are. But so Israel participates in Europe, but a lot of Arab states still will boycott Israel. Lebanon being one example, they have a boycott law that they do not normalise relations with Israel, and there's many examples actually of athletes still upholding those boycotts. I think there was a young chess player there during the week who refused to play, and so they still uphold the boycott against Israel. So there's so many examples that we can call upon.
Yeah, and ironically then Israel have a law that would make it against the law to boycott them.
Yeah, and just to say as well, on like FIFA and UEFA and just kind of the size of global football, like the cultural and commercial dominance of soccer is massive and can't be understated, and that's why I think this really has like captivated everybody, because it could have such an impact and it could influence the whole movement. I mean, I think the movement has influenced this moment, but I think this can equally influence the movement past this, and like what happens after the games. If we don't play them, it could influence a lot of boycotting. But FIFA, like, they operate kind of like countries. I mean, they're global regulatory monopolies, meaning like that their rules act in the same way countries' rules act on their civilians or their citizens. But they also have revenue of more than some countries' GDPs. Like, these are huge, huge entities we're talking about. So it's all wrapped up in money, and it's all wrapped up in politics, and it's all wrapped up in greed and maintaining their own best interests and their own particular type of politics. So yeah, I think the impact a football or soccer boycott can have is massive.
It's safe to say that a lot of the countries who have influence and have the most like economic and political influence within the huge governing bodies are also the countries a lot of the time that have an economic and political interest in upholding occupation and apartheid in Palestine.
Yeah.
There's no getting away from the fact that they are so connected.
Yeah, like football is used as a tool of occupation and a tool, like FIFA and UEFA are effectively participating in the colonisation of Palestine through football and through these illegal settlements, through the growth of these settlements, through the funding. The inclusion of the settlement clubs within global football structures means that they're entitled to funding, they're entitled to, you know, the broadcasting rights as well, also creating revenue. Because if you didn't create life within settlements, whether that's through sport, culture, music, trade, business, if you didn't create that life, there'd be no reason for these settlements to exist. So they're actively complicit in maintaining this and growing it.
And it seems to be, like, I'm not like heavily involved in like the soccer world, or whatever, more of a hurling fan.
Yeah.
But looking somewhat from the outside, like seeing the recent game against Qatar, when the Irish fans threw the tennis balls with Palestine flags onto the pitch, and just seeing fans in general, whether they're over at Celtic matches or within the Irish League, that there is a broad base of support for Palestine. There's a broad base of support for stopping this fixture with Israel going ahead amongst the fans, and a lot of times amongst the players as well. But what needs to happen to translate that support into the governing bodies that are ultimately going to be the ones who can make the decision?
Yeah, I mean, fans and players have huge power here. I mean, there'd be no sport without fans or players. And I do think it is hitting them on their bottom line, because that's the only thing that seems to talk to them. So if it is commercial boycotts, if it is, you know, boycotting other fixtures, if it's boycotting merch, you know, like not putting money in their pockets and really hitting them and saying, I'm a fan of this sport, or I'm a member of your association and I refuse to be complicit in this, I demand you to act reflecting my interests. Like, it could be down to commercial boycotts. But even like on that, you know, you're saying you're a hurling fan, and like Irish sport is so rooted in resistance and anti-colonialism and anti-imperialism anyway. And I think just no matter what sport you play, just being an Irish person playing sport, like that means something. And I do think remembering those roots is really important here. And again, it applies to fans as well, but just remembering those roots, that Irish sport had a large part to play in the anti-colonial resistance of this island. And, you know, I think channeling that is important here.
What impact has moving the games to these like neutral venues had on the Stop the Game campaign? Yeah,
it's taken away our right to protest, firstly, because if it was happening here, we would have, you know, done everything to make the games unplayable through all these different channels of action that we've been talking about. But yeah, it's moved now behind closed doors, so-called neutral venue. Yeah, like, let's talk about Serbia. Like, it's not neutral. They're actually complicit. But then you also have to remember, you know, Serbian history and genocide as well, and like the Bosnian genocide and Srebrenica, like, you know, that all gives context as well. But then even from a footballing perspective, Serbia Football Federation was penalised, I think it was December 2024, for fan misconduct and racism. And, you know, this is the kind of parallels as well with Israeli Football Association, who was also, you know, sanctioned for racism, discrimination, and found to be in breach of statutes. So yeah, they're not neutral venues. They're actually, you know, very complicit in upholding this current reality of sport. And I think Hungary, being the other fixture as well, they took all of Israel's home games when the games were moved out. So they're not neutral venues by any means. And certain countries have also signed up to the UN Convention Against Apartheid in Sport, which means as host nations you have certain obligations to deny visas, to, you know, advocate for the removal of offending regimes from sport. And we do know that Israel is committing apartheid. So yeah, I think Hungary signed that. I don't know if they've ratified it, but many countries who are hosting Israeli games are party to these conventions. So yeah, moving it has had an impact, but it doesn't mean we've stopped, and it doesn't mean that our calls have changed at all, because as I said, it's stopped the game, not moved the game. There's still, actions we can take, and whether that's through protecting workers who don't want to work and facilitate these games going ahead, whether that's again political pressure, because again we've seen the political left being very united in this, and putting a lot of pressure on the government. So there's that. We're getting a legal opinion as well on the protection of workers coming. Then there's also an EGM for the FAI, so the Football Association. The members again called for this EGM, but now the FAI said it didn't meet the requisition and they weren't going to call it. But they have now said that they're going to call it, but they've changed the motion. So that will happen start of July, next week. So that's another way that they can, again, reflect the will of members and, the will of everyone here who wants to support the boycott.
So there's an overwhelming groundswell support from the members of the FAI to boycott this match, right? And who is it, the FAI that made the decision to move the game to a neutral venue, or who makes that call?
Yeah, so the FAI applies to UEFA to get it approved. So FAI and UEFA have approved this. And
would the government have been involved in terms of consulting with the FAI, being we think this should be moved, so if you want to move it to a neutral venue, we'll give you the thumbs up? Is that the way it works, or what?
Well, so they would have consulted. They've said various stakeholders without ever actually naming them, but would have been with the government and also the guards and Garda Síochána to kind of say, because they've said it's not being played for operational challenges or something silly, because essentially they kind of said, okay, what's the risk assessment of having the game here? Operational challenges means we have to move the game. So that's what they would have decided, and that kind of was the input from various people. But if you have to move the game because of security issues or operational challenges, you shouldn't be playing the game. That should be obvious enough. And if you would just remove Israel, you'd skip all these problems.
But has the decision to move the game been presented by public representatives, including TDs and those people from the FAI, as sort of meeting the protesters halfway, saying hey, we accept that you have a point, there are issues here with the Israeli soccer team and with the Israeli regime, therefore we're going to move the game outside of Ireland, and hoping that kind of quells the campaign? I
think they wanted that effect. They definitely wanted that, because always we had said kind of planning for all different eventualities. Again, it is an informal campaign, with a lot of grassroots involvement, but it is still strategized and it still is, planned out. So one of them was if the game is moved, but we thought they would have set it up as kind of a win. But so when we heard that it was going to be moved, we then presented the legal challenge, just to kind of say you can't get away from it. You're just giving cover to this. You're trying to hide behind it, and that's not acceptable. So I do think they thought it would be, a compromise And I think as well when so FAI released a statement, they were the ones who said we're moving the game, and that's when they included that Palestine FA endorsement, the misrepresentation that was completely inaccurate. And I think it was a really shameful attempt, but I think it was designed to undermine the movement and undermine the support. Now it backfired because it was incorrect and it was just such a cynical attempt. But
for context, that was that the FAI came out and said that the Palestinian Football Association had basically told them they could go ahead with the fixture and they're not going to object to it.
That we support and endorse the FAI playing this fixture and support them as a governing body to do that. And then the PFA had to come out and say, no.
They subsequently released a statement, which actually people can look up online and see that statement. It's very clear saying they did not do that.
Yeah, that they've been misrepresented, that we have always only said as a governing body you're entitled to do whatever, but we do not support, they actually said we do not support the normalisation and sports washing, which this is, you're sports washing a genocide, and the PFA did not endorse that. And I think the Irish Association thought that it would have an effect that, would quell or appease everyone, but it absolutely doesn't. It actually has the opposite effect. And I think it just shows as well that they're not fulfilling their ability to govern properly or be trustworthy, and that's not what you want from a governing body.
Has the relocation of the games taken the wind out of the sails of the campaign a little bit, domestically?
No, it actually gave it more amp. So people were doubling down, and they said absolutely not. This gives us more ammunition to keep going. And again, enter the next phase of the campaign and to keep going, because we still have time. We still have time to act here and keep putting pressure on it. This is not going away. And I think as well, it is up to these games, but then it's the after as well. Like, it's not just a short-term thing. Yes, it's a single issue constrained campaign, but like overall, and even like for Irish sport and for Irish Sport for Palestine and other campaigns, it doesn't end in October. Like, it's after. And this only adds to the growing momentum to remove Israel from sport. Like, it's not just stopping these games. The ultimate goal is to remove Israel, to sanction them, and that's always been the goal. So yeah, I think keeping that long-term goal in mind is important here as well. But no, moving the game didn't take any wind out of the sails at all.
In terms of the game being moved, that actually doesn't mitigate any of the issues that have been raised about playing the game in the first place.
No.
And I know, like, we've already kind of discussed them in terms of the basketball team, like, but if you were to give like a whirlwind kind of overview of what the main issues are in terms of playing against the soccer team that remain unmitigated regardless of where the game's being played, what are they?
Yeah, the issue is not where you play the game, the issue is playing Israel, because committing a genocide. It's actually getting worse because they're still targeting athletes, they're still maiming, injuring, destroying infrastructure. That's still happening. Again, though, we have the statute breaches for decades, we have the upholding apartheid, the brutal occupation and oppression that Israel is upholding, the international law breaches, the continued use of sports washing and the continued use of normalising such egregious regimes within normal life. So sports washing, normalising, legitimising war crimes, giving cover and shield to apartheid. And then also you have governing bodies, you have governments, you have international federations giving themselves cover from accountability, shielding themselves from any kind of moral or legal or political action. So, and we were actually part of a case to bring the presidents of UEFA and FIFA, Infantino and Chefrin, to the ICC. So we were part of a filing to refer them for aiding and abetting war crimes and crimes against humanity. So sports is very much complicit in aiding and abetting war crimes. So that hasn't changed, that's still remaining. And aside from these games, a brutal oppression and occupation still happens in Palestine, the genocide still rages on, there's no such thing as ceasefire, and really it's only until you end apartheid and end occupation and free Palestine that this will go away.
Which goes back to the point that you were making, that this goes much beyond October when the fixture is due to happen. And these campaigns, in many ways, the main purpose that they serve is to move the dial a little bit forward. And there is a huge opportunity here to move that dial forward significantly by not playing the game. And like a few years ago, whenever the Irish politicians from North and South were going over to meet Joe Biden, who's one of the main funders of the genocide and the occupation in Palestine, there was a widespread campaign in Ireland for the politicians to boycott that meeting. And one of the counter arguments was, well, what's the point in not going to the White House? It's not going to stop the genocide, it's not going to have any impact on the ground in Palestine, and the Americans want to keep funding the occupation anyway, regardless of whether or not the politicians go to the White House on St. Patrick's Day. But ultimately, I think Ireland holds quite a lot of sway for the size of the country. And in terms of boycotting these types of events, it would have been a hugely symbolic gesture of solidarity to Palestinians, and it would have turned heads in Washington, might have resulted in damage in some relations in terms of like Irish-American economic or political relations. But ultimately America, the United States, are sustaining the occupation. So it's got to the point where we're obliged to take action, even if there is kind of a price to pay for that action and for doing the right thing. So then in terms of like people who might say, well, what's the point in boycotting this match? We're going to get penalised. Israel's still going to be there, still going to be doing the genocide, all of the occupation still going to be there. But ultimately, when we're talking about moving the dial, Ireland could lead the way here on not just for the conscience of the Irish people or the players that have to play, but on the international stage, there is an opportunity here to do something really, really significant that might have parallels with the Dunstores workers' strikes against apartheid South Africa, when the Dunstores workers refused to handle South African goods. Like, it's hard to say now, looking back. It's like, that was like in the 80s, so we're like, I don't know what you were born in, but I was probably very just still a baby or whatever. But we look back at that now as a really symbolic gesture, and even Nelson Mandela recognised it and said that it was a huge gesture, and that they seen and they acknowledged at the time whenever it was happening. But at the same time, there was a lot of ridicule towards that campaign at the time, and it's kind of the same thing now, where there's an opportunity to do something significant that could have a significant long-term effect, especially if we're looking back in 20 years. Are we going to say that's the Irish team that refused to play the Israeli soccer team, and then all of these other countries refused to play them thereafter? Or are we going to look back and say, oh, we just carried on as if nothing was happening at the time? So I guess for people like listening or watching to this podcast, it might be useful to reflect on the fact that there is precedent for these types of boycotts in the past, not just in the sporting arena, and there might not have been universal support for them at the time. Those people may have been ridiculed. Like, that was like a relatively small group of Dunstores workers. It was like led by Mary Manning back in the day. Led
by women.
Yeah, that decided to take the step forward, to take the hit, to take a lot of the abuse that you were talking about earlier on. You were talking about the online abuse that the players and campaigners have been receiving. And now really it is really the time to like get behind those who are willing to take the steps forward to make the boycott happen, and like be on like the right side of history in many ways.
You know, Ireland is hugely influential on the world stage. Like, that can't be understated enough, and it has been demonstrated. But yeah, it is time. Like, we have to go beyond hollow words and symbolic gestures. And actually, like, we say that was a symbolic gesture by the Dunstores workers, but that was definite action. Like, that was direct action. And we have to remember as well, it didn't happen overnight. Like, it has been, that was a sustained campaign. They did take the flak for a lot of time by themselves.
But they lost their jobs.
They paid the price. But then long term, as you say, had a huge impact. And that is exactly what's happening here. And yeah, it would be very easy to give in to the nihilism and the hopelessness and what difference will it make? But you just can't, because it's not true, firstly. But that's what they want you to do. And if we actually just compare the last 3 years, the support has grown so much. The pro-Palestinian movement in Ireland has grown so much and has achieved so much as well. Like, every action counts and adds up, and arguably we wouldn't be in this kind of position if it hadn't been for that long-term sustained movement. And it wasn't just the last 3 years. I mean, it's been going on for decades, the Irish solidarity. So it has been building, but now we have a chance to really make a huge impact. And as you say, it could be the thing that sparks more action. It could be the thing to inspire other nations. I mean, we've been working with other countries, civil society movements on the ground, including Austria, who have now started their own Stop the Game campaign. So it's already having an impact beyond Ireland, and it can have impact even more so if we all, these transnational solidarity links, if we build on that, who knows what could happen. And as you say, previous boycotts like South Africa, it has been successful, and sport was the decisive factor in ending that, so it can happen again.
Yeah, and just to kind of reiterate that point, that this is coming from a place of like love for sport in general. That's ultimately where it's coming from. It's
football led, it's sports led, it's upholding the values of sport and acting with integrity that sport teaches you or should teach you.
How many clubs have been completely pulverised by the Israeli occupation in Gaza? Clubs have been shut down.
How many amputees do you now have?
Football players being killed, and nothing has been done about it. So even from a if you're a football fan and you're not keeping track of what's happening on the news, just look at that. Those facts about how many clubs have been completely destroyed, how many stadiums have been destroyed, how many players have been killed or have been like gravely injured through no fault of their own, other than the fact that they're Palestinian and that they're being subjected to this occupation and this ongoing genocide. And even look at the World Cup. I mean, you can't look any further than having the same country hosting it that's actually bombing another country participating. I mean, the absolute,
barbarity of it all, and that's happening within sport. But then you see the flip side of how sport can actually bring everyone together. It actually can bring nations together, can captivate everyone and have that spirit of solidarity, as you say. Like, we love sport, and sport can definitely bring that together. So why don't we have the same impact by boycotting Israel? Because I do think that will have the same sentiment.
Yeah, and soccer is such a big thing in Palestine as well as other sports, boxing, and stuff.
But particularly soccer, yeah.
Yeah, like to take like the Laddie Celtic football team, who are like have strong international links with the Green Brigade, and Celtic supporters, with groups here in Ireland. It's used as a massive vehicle for like recreation, for sport, for opportunities for young people, for international travel, and also for kind of platforming issues that Palestinians are facing on a day-to-day basis. And if anything else, I think there is a very strong responsibility for soccer fans to stand shoulder to shoulder with other soccer fans and other soccer players in Palestine, and this is like a great opportunity to do that. And as you say, it's not like we don't have an insignificant impact on the international stage. This is not just something that's just for Ireland. It's something like to set an example for other countries.
Yeah.
So how can people like find out more about the Stop Again campaign?
Yeah, so it's a very simple branding. It's hashtag Stop the Game. You see any amount of images, media reporting, ways to get involved. So yeah, banners at matches. So any kind of Stop the Game, you can type it in, you'll see it. But also Irish Sport for Palestine, you can reach out to us there. But also a lot of football clubs have been at the forefront of this. I mean, Bo's have been incredible in leading the charge in this. So yeah, finding out how to get involved by getting in touch, but then seeing where you can act in your area. I mean, we're trying to host soccer blitzes now, so around the country, all Ireland, hosting alternative events that will really, show solidarity to Palestine and say that we reject playing against Israel and normalising it. So we're partnering with Goals for Gaza on that one. So yeah, if you want to organise a blitz, get in touch. You can do that. And yeah, if you want to make banners, go for it. Any kind of sporting event you want to show your protest at, that's welcome. In
terms of the sports clubs outside of soccer that are in Ireland, I get the feeling that in a lot of communities and in clubs, social clubs, sports clubs, in the musical arena and in the field of arts as well, that a lot of the time there could be one or two people within a group who feel compelled to do something in solidarity with Palestine, but sometimes or maybe like not confident in presenting it to the rest of the group, or not sure how to kind of take a step forward. And I think like some of the stuff that we've talked about here might actually help with that, and help maybe people to be able to speak about it a bit more freely, or to talk about it with their colleagues or their teammates or other people who are involved in the clubs with them. But is it possible for people to reach out to Sport for Palestine as well if they feel like they need a little bit of guidance or a little bit of assistance in terms of how to bring something to the table within their own clubs? Yeah,
100%. So Irish Sport for Palestine at gmail.com. They can email us there. We've given support to the Irish Wheelchair Rugby. Alan Janine was probably the first public player to boycott Israel by himself. So we offered support. We had, we can definitely support people if they want to take action, whether that's boycotting or bringing it to their club. There's also ways to get involved as an apartheid-free zone, which sports clubs can become. So yeah, get in touch with us. We can help out how we can, whether that's sending information, having calls, kind of connecting them with local groups as well in their area, hosting different events. Because yeah, as we said, it's a lot of different sports. Climbing is making huge gains in this, boycotting Israel. Climbing,
rock climbing.
Yeah, there's also cycling has been huge for this. Ultimate Frisbee as well, and there's a tournament this year in Ireland. But last year, they had a statement to their governing body who didn't take action, but then several teams boycotted the game. So Ireland boycotted. We also had France boycott, and those kind of examples are out there. They just don't get the same coverage. So yeah, other sports definitely have been making huge moves. and we are more than happy to support any of that and connect different people.
And it is also important to acknowledge that it doesn't have to be a high profile case, doesn't have to be an international fixture in soccer. Like even like you mentioned, I mean, not many people, relatively speaking, are probably tuned into the wheelchair rugby scene in Ireland, but that is still a very significant and powerful gesture for Alan to have boycotted that game, because it opened up the conversation amongst his teammates and amongst the people who do follow wheelchair rugby.
And often it's the action that's not reported on, the one that goes under the radar, like people doing the graft that doesn't get noticed. Like that's what makes these building blocks, and that's what we have to appreciate and build on. Like no matter what your situation is or where you're standing, like you need to be acting.
Yeah, there's so much more that we could talk about as well. I feel like the Allianz sponsorship within the GA is another really big issue that is something that people need to become more aware of and take more action on, but it's probably a conversation for another day. I think we've left people with enough to get their heads around for today. So thanks very much for coming in to do the podcast and for sharing all of your thoughts and experiences with us, and also for, I think, like giving people a better understanding of what's happening in the background with the Stop the Game campaign, what's happening with Irish Sport for Palestine, and also giving people a bit of an insight in terms of like how the mechanics of governing bodies is working as well, which I think is really important insight for people to have. And as you mentioned, there's Irish Sport for Palestine Instagram page,
Facebook, email,
and Stop the Game. The Stop the Game has its own Instagram page as well now? No.
So we're using the infrastructure of everyone else.
Okay, so Irish Sport for Palestine, that's how you keep up to date with the Stop the Game campaign. And how can people get those t-shirts you're wearing?
Yeah, get in touch with us. Or if you're in Dublin, Bang Bang Cafe.